This should be brief. Keywords are should be, because it probably won't be. Undisputed Attitude by Slayer. This is largely a covers album. I have to say largely because they're not all covers. There's only 3 songs that aren't, and only one of them is truly a Slayer song, and it's the very final track, Gemini. We'll get to that, believe me. The other 2 are actually from a Jeff Hammond and Dave Lombardo project that also included a member of Suicidal Tendencies entitled Pap Smear, or a punk band. And this is largely a punk album, considering punk is a tremendous, tremendous influence on Slayer's sound. Big surprise, right? Was it a big surprise whenever you found that out, whenever you listened to Garage Incorporated or any of the other different EPs that were released by Metallica? Is it any surprise whatsoever that punk is instrumental in crafting thrash metal? This isn't going to be brief because this has a stigma to it. This is a love it or hate it album among Slayer fans, and it is something that also creates a bit of a conflict that I need to address, not among Slayer fans, but among music fans. And we're going to get to that to the end, near the end of the video, so you're definitely going to want to stick around, as this is very important, especially if you are a young fan of music. Slayer's influences definitely are very varied, to say the least. Considering we talked about on albums such as Hell Awaits their influence from bands such as Venom and Merciful Fate, and now we're talking about it's an album that's completely encountered with punk. We're talking about groups such as the True Sounds of Liberty. We're talking about songs that are a classic, such as Richard Hung Himself or I Hate You. Verbal Abuse is on here quite a bit. And it's just a real cavalcade and a great representation of what punk music was all about whenever Slayer was really getting their foundation, and even as they were sort of getting their foundation set in stone. This is an album that's extremely quick, is extremely aggressive. These songs are very short. These songs also have a great amount of rage implemented within them. So the actual representations versus the original, Slayer does what they can with it. They make it really true to their sound while still trying their best to maintain a certain punk aesthetic to go along with it. That being said, this is actually one of the principal critiques that a lot of people have, that this was an album that, whenever it was released, they wanted a Slayer album. They didn't want a punk album. They didn't want a covers album. Who the fuck cares? This is actually a really, really cool disc based around that ideal and based around where we were in music history, which was around 1996, I believe. This is something where this aesthetic of punk, this idea of punk, had been kind of dying down considerably. Yeah, and this is where we're going to start talking with a little bit more pent-up energy. But before we do that, we must talk about Gemini, as well as the track that precedes it, which is I Want to Be Your God, as opposed to I Want to Be Your Dog. I don't really feel that that switch up was really necessary. Whether or not there was some sort of struggle in order to get the rights or whatever, obviously not, considering they still played the song, but I felt that was a little strange, and I felt that was a little unnecessary. Fun facts, though, they considered also doing a Doors song on there, which would have been really, really interesting, because apparently there were some influences there, I think, for Jeff, either that or Tom, I don't know. Gemini is a track that has a sludgy, doomy, real texture to it, and it maintains itself throughout the course of most of the song. In fact, at times, it doesn't even sound like Tom is singing whatsoever on this disc. It sounds like it's an outsider. It sounds like it's an alien. It's crazy. It's pretty cool. And it really reminds me of what we just talked about with Divine Intervention, what we talked about with the self-titled song on that disc, of the opportunity that was missed. Gemini basically proves my point, that Slayer is not only capable of songs of this variety, but Slayer is pretty damn good at them. Gemini is a great track, and it feels a little out of place on this collection. Because you take a look at everything that you see on this album, and you examine it, and you think to yourself, well, Slayer's right here at the end. Are they writing a punk song? Are they writing something that has that quick aesthetic? Is it going to be reminiscent of Rain and Blood? Is it going to be reminiscent of Show No Mercy? Hell Awaits? Do we need to name it Haunting the Chapel? Do we need to name it? Is it going to be resemblant to their 1980s material? They took a risk. They took a huge risk. they put something on here that really did not have that aesthetic within it whatsoever. It was instead one that has, as I said, a very sludgy, a very doomy feel to it, and really maintains itself. It does get a little bit more aggressive as you reach the end point of its runtime duration, but even with that being said, it is completely and totally out of place, and I actually don't mind that whatsoever. Mainly because this leads you up to something. And even though this is different, and even though this sort of completely disrupts everything else that this album is about, it is a solid enough track that you don't mind. So now we get to the part where I need to talk to some of the younger music fans that are out there. Some of you out there are Slayer fans, and this isn't going to apply to a lot, so I'm going to actually tell you that some of you that are Slayer fans that are younger, you should share this video with those friends of yours that are claiming that they are punk, that they like punk music, that they go to Warped Tour, and that's a punk show, and everything like that. Because I don't think some of them understand what people mean by what you're listening to is not real punk. You need to link them to wherever on the timestamp this section begins. If you want to know what punk is, and you like Slayer, then this is the album to listen to. Undisputed Attitude. These songs, they're all covers. They're all punk covers by true punk bands that were, basically doing what trailblazed the entire genre. And these aren't the Ramones, the Clash, things like that. These were not the bands that were the ones that were being seen by everybody, that were being right there out there in the open, that really were the sort of poster boys and poster bands of the movement. These were the ones that had the underground recognition. These were the ones that actually were causing quite a bit of a stir, that actually put a foundation down for a movement that you and a lot of the people within the own movement itself are bastardizing by using that name whenever what you listen to and what you are is neither punk. Undisputed Attitude by Slayer executes and showcases what it was all about, and does so with a heavier environment. If you think that a single one of the bands that were on Warped, with the outside chance of maybe a Bad Religion, are punk, you're dead wrong. This is an album that actually proves that quite nicely. Whoever has linked this to you is not a bastard, by the way. They just want to make you aware. And so do I. This is a black sheep among the Slayer catalog. This is one that is kind of the one of these things is not like the other, but at the same time, its reputation is kind of one that shouldn't be tarnished. It's actually one that shouldn't be all of that bad. This is a lot of fun as an album. If you are a fan of punk music, of the old school aesthetic in any way, shape, or form, then this is certainly an album that you're going to be able to enjoy. Principally because you're going to hear that realism that is really behind it. This is not a band in Slayer that's trying to impersonate old school punk and claim to be what old school punk was. They don't have to, because they have a genuine quality and a genuine a real reflection of that within them. So it was not a hard stretch for them to do this. It was not difficult. And I think that this album catches a lot of unnecessary flack because people wanted a Slayer album and instead they got a covers album. When in reality, they should be pretty damn thankful for it because it's an awesome covers album. It's one that has a lot of charm. I understand if you're not into old school punk music, if you were never into this kind of stuff, then it is kind of difficult to get into it. But in reality, whenever you listen to it, how different from Slayer is it truly? How different is this truly from a Slayer album? Especially the ones from the 1980s that are widely considered to be large-scale, untouchable classics. Think about Rain and Blood. Think about how short those tracks are. Think about the brutality. Think about the speed. Think about the buzzsaw that that album really created. Sure, it's a little bit different than punk, but are they really all that different? I think this album gets a bad reputation, and I think it gets a bad rep. It's one that certainly should be checked out by Slayer fans. And considering what's coming next, this is probably the more memorable album of the two. And that's right, we have to talk about Diabolus and Musica next. This is going to be fun. you should stick around and stay tuned. Because if you thought what I did before was a little angry, ain't seen nothing yet. Must not know me very well.